Welcome to the webinar, What Leaders Need to Know and to be Successful in the Not-for-Profit Sector. My name is Sakina Vora and I'm the Volunteer Events and Marketing Officer here at Connecting Up. Our speaker today is Christine Kota. Chris is the inaugural leader in residence at Leadership Victoria. She works around Australia with chief executives, boards and councils, politicians and local community leaders to strengthen the capabilities and their organizations and improve the effectiveness of leadership practice. Chris will mainly be sharing her experience today and will not have a PowerPoint presentation. So before I hand it over to Chris, just wanted to go through some housekeeping notes. To those who are new, please feel free to type in your questions in the question box and we will try and make sure to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. If you're facing any technical issues, like if you're having any audio issues or unable to, not applicable in this case, please type in those issues as well and we will get it sorted out for you. This presentation is being recorded, so everyone present here will receive an email with the link to the recording by the end of the day today. So without further ado, I pass it on to Chris.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm very pleased that Connecting Up has asked me to be part of a conversation about what leaders need to know and be able to do to be successful in the not-for-profit sector. So every week I'm working with CEOs and board members and board chairs and staff in not-for-profit organisations, very much like your own, and volunteer groups and really key people who are wanting to get into the not-for-profit sector, and actually some of them who are trying to get out of it. So I think it's important that you know a little bit about where I'm coming from on this particular issue. I think that leadership is a verb, that it's about action, it's about activity, it's about the way we go about doing things in this sector. It's not so much about a position. The title on a business card or the power that you get from being a senior person. So this is about leadership for all of us, and particularly how we use it in our positions in organisations and when we're working the front line with groups and when we're on boards. And it's also important for me to say that I think the sector is extraordinarily important. That's why I work in the not-for-profit sector. It's the sector that's got the greatest impact on lifting the quality of the way people live. And I think it's also facing a really dangerous time. I think there are a few key things that will help not-for-profit organisations and the sector grow stronger, more influential, more powerful, and really touch on more people's lives. I should also say that I'm quite tough on the sector. When I'm working on strategy or doing reviews or evaluations or doing stakeholder engagement, I really want this sector to soar and flourish, and that's why you might actually hear me saying some things that are quite hard to hear about leadership in this particular sector. So I'm looking forward to spending the next while with you and going through some issues. I'd really be interested in any questions or comments. I think of this more as a conversation, and if there are any thoughts that you have the other side of our hour together, that you have my contact details and can connect back with Connecting Up and keep this conversation going. What will probably happen is that I'll only touch the sides of some of the issues that I think are probably worthy of a session in themselves. So let's go. I think the not-for-profit sector has, if you think back into the past, some extraordinary claims around leadership. In the 1960s, the not-for-profit sector led the civil rights movement. The 1980s, the human rights movement. The 1990s saw apartheid dismantled, and that wouldn't have happened without this sector. The environmental movement, campaigns such as making poverty history, protecting children from abuse, curing particular illnesses. I think it is the sector of conscience. And I'm also seeing that governments, this is true right around the world, are increasingly moving service responsibility to the not-for-profit sector, not just because all of your organisations are at the front line, you're actually very good at it, better at it than governments. And I guess with that comes the responsibility to deliver really excellent services and to keep improving the not-for-profit sector, its organisations and leadership. Quite apart from anything else, there's a major economic impact in Australia through this particular sector. It's something like over $42 billion moves through this sector, and it employs more than 600,000 people every day. So it's a sector that exerts a huge amount of power, a lot of influence, and it's joining up efforts right around the world. Who wouldn't want to be involved in this extraordinary sector? And at the same time, I think it's a sector that has no place for people who come to it because it's a hobby, because it's a place where zealots can act out extreme views, where perhaps dilettantes who are just shopping around for something to get interested in and involved in fetch up on committees or boards or in organisations. I also say that I'm interested in more and more people coming into the sector because they have ambition for other people, not because they pity them. So I've got a fairly strong view about what I think are some of those motives or leadership ambitions that people bring into the sector. At the same time, I think the sector is undergoing huge changes, and we ain't seen nothing yet. The surf is up for some not-for-profit organisations, but it's a dangerous time for others. I think there are fabulous opportunities, terrific opportunities for those organisations that are most effective. But I also think the sector is very patchy, and I think there will be a number of organisations who will, or maybe should, close down or move to other models of operating. And I can think of a number of organisations that have already disappeared in the last 12 months or so, and we don't even know about it. In other words, they have gone and we are not missing them. So a couple of things that I think are really interesting influences for change in this sector. The first is, I think, and this isn't telling you anything particularly new, but I think the volatile economy with really fickle funding sources are moving money in and out and across the sector much more quickly than it ever has before. I think regulation reforms are increasing pressures to be much more professional are having an impact. And I think there are lots and lots of opportunities for, if I call it innovation, I really mean fresh ideas, other ways of thinking, fabulous examples of really good practice, often around Australia but also from overseas, that are really coming into the consciousness of people who are leaders in this sector. We in the community at large really love the sector, but we don't always want to keep spending our money. Yeah. So we're fickle in our attachments and our loyalties. The next is that I think the sector is also really fragmented, probably overcrowded, probably with too many organisations that are highly specialised, and I think there's lots and lots of competition in the sector. I think that can often confuse funders, and it's harder to see the uniqueness between organisations when many of them have been around for a long time or keep fetching up the next particular issue. And I think that lots and lots of them are probably over-specialised. And what that does is create, at least in the minds of the community, lots and lots of different opportunities, but also it's quite hard to pick the difference between different organisations who are occupying the same space. I should also say that I think I'm seeing more and more disdain for other sectors from within the not-for-profit sector. And it works the other way around too. It's almost as if all of the sectors, and I guess I'm thinking of the not-for-profit sector, but also the business community, government, different departments, whilst they try to work together, I see a lot of contempt for each other's contributions, and I think that gets in the way. But I think we're going to see more and more of that, and I'll say a little about that later on, because I think there are real opportunities if we can actually work across the sectors and in partnerships, as opposed to being contemptuous of what different partners can bring to the work of the not-for-profit sector. I should also say that I see lots of organisations who simply muddle along. They have out-of-date business models. They don't have a great strategy. I mean, they've got a lot of them strategic plans, but that's different to actually being able to implement strategy and make things happen. A large number of them, I think, have very amateurish oversight. And whilst I think people come into this sector with very good intentions, I think my comment about increasing professionalism is really important here. I think lots of organisations are getting by on the momentum of their history and their previous reputations, but they're focusing inward rather than looking at what's happening in the environment beyond their bubble. I also see a number that tolerate mediocre performance, and I'm really hoping that with the number of people listening today and the thoughts that this might start operating on you, that some of those issues are really ripe for you to think about and really grasp. I think this is a time when some organisations are really seizing the moment. They are creative. They're coming up with new business models, new services, new ways of combining products, new IP, and thinking about new ways to get data and how to actually mine it. I think there's also, and I'm happy with this, an increasing demand for high order capabilities on boards and management committees. I say to people that if you're thinking about recruiting board members and bringing people into your organisation, go for talent ahead of mates. Think about really strong professional capabilities, intellect, smart thinking, really good technical skills. As I said, I think the sector is patchy. I think it's messy and all over the place, but I actually quite like that because it's not one way of going about doing things, and I'm very excited about the prospects, but also very realistic that leadership in this sector is not about the romance of leadership. It's about hard work and talented people putting together their technical skills and expertise along with their commitment. I find increasingly that there are very few not-for-profit organisations who can make all the difference that they're trying to make on their own. I'm seeing an increasing number of partnerships across sectors, with government departments, with agencies, with funding organisations, with businesses, with clusters, with schools from across the sector joining their forces, people thinking about what happens in local communities. And I guess that's leading me to the view that because the issues and the problems are so complex, or they can be so challenging, that there isn't any public sector problem that can be solved entirely by one sector or another. That some components are best handled by government, others by maybe the market, and others by the community, because each of these sectors have got a role, piece of the jigsaw, and they've got resources. In fact, each of them are very good at doing some things that the others can't. And so I'm seeing more opportunities to join up efforts across sectors and between organisations, and often that causes some rough seams as these organisations join up. But it's because each of them have got their own boards and their own values and their own cultures, and they've often been rivals. I see a lot of organisations who are competitors, but who actually join up efforts because it means that they can get something happening that's really worthwhile that they couldn't on their own. I think this kind of leadership that I'm talking about is made up of two things. I think it is both technical skills, so it's to do with plans and budgets and structures and systems, but it's also always to do with people and relationships and how you bring a whole group of people together. And what I think really distinguishes really exemplary boards, and by that I mean successful not-for-profit organisations who continue to perform seriously and well over long periods of time and under real stress. And I think what distinguishes those organisations and their boards and their committees is not just structural. It's not just the rules and the regulations. It's that they're actually robust, effective social systems where people in the organisation and or around the board table or around the committee table understand that culture really matters, that respect, trust, candour, open dissent between individuals, honest evaluation of performance of a board or a committee can really make a huge difference. So let me give you 6 points perhaps about what I think the top boards and not-for-profit organisations that I have worked with in the last year, maybe 18 months or so, so this is very recent, really get to understand. The first is strategy. I don't just mean a strategic plan. In fact, I think on this point lots of organisations have realised that the traditional 3 to 5 year strategic plan is just no longer relevant because everything's moving so quickly. So the tempo has really increased. What they do is use almost every board meeting or committee meeting as an opportunity for a strategy discussion. So of course they've got strategic plans and business plans and annual reports, but they use every opportunity they can for foresight and finding ways to reinvent. They're forever looking for fresh oxygen to bring into the organisation, and they look up and beyond the organisation and the sector to find it. So that strategy, which of course is a suite of documents and a process, but it's also a mindset. It's a way of thinking about where the future's going and where to place the best efforts of the organisation to really capitalise on that. The next one is something about who you recruit and have on boards and committees and what their motives for being there are like and what their skills are like. I guess I see a lot of people who want to get on boards or who are board members or get on committees who are frankly really there for themselves. It's almost as if the board or the organisation is a private plaything. They turn up, but they don't really bring their best. They're there to use the opportunity to build up their CVs, or because it's going to look good, or because they're just passing through. They're really on a small not-for-profit board because their ambitions are really about getting on a much larger board somewhere down the track. I'm not cynical about those contributions. I think that people's motives vary when they want to get on boards and committees. But for me, this sector is so important that I really want people to bring the best of themselves. I want them not just to turn up to meetings, I want them to really turn up and offer their skills, their networks, their knowledge and their content. You see, this comes to the heart of the matter of what you need to know and be able to do. And I think it often appears around that boardroom table or in that committee meeting or when that group gets together. So what do you need to know? That's your content. And what do you need to be able to do? That's your action. And that's, of course, where strategy comes in. The third point is to do with 3 steps. And I've yet to find a situation where they don't happen in this order. And this is about 3 steps to get the best possible work done consistently, when the work is tough, when there aren't enough resources, and when you need the cooperation of a whole lot of people to change things. So the first step is getting people's attention. Well, that might sound easy. You think about campaigns or social media or celebrity board members or a particular issue or cause. Getting attention is not that hard. We've got so many ways of using so many different forms of communication that getting attention these days is pretty straightforward. Still got its challenges, but it's not the most difficult thing. The next step is to earn people's trust. That's the difficult one, because that's about people and relationships and reputation. It's about realizing that at the moment in Australia there are lots of people and organisations and places where official leadership gets acted out. And a lot of us have lost trust. I don't need to go through the full list, but you've only got to think about some parts of politics, organisations like unions, and the churches, when you think of the Royal Commission and some of the issues that that's throwing up, the military. I could keep going through the list, but you probably have your own experience where you trusted or thought you trusted people and institutions whose leadership was meant to be unassailable. And over the last 12, 18 months or so, when I'm working in communities, I've seen a real drop in trust of formal leadership of the sort that resides in lots of organisations and institutions. And the last step in that process is to get people's support. In my experience, getting support is almost impossible if you don't have people's trust. You can get their attention, but in order to get their trust, that's where the relationships are important. That's where reputation matters. That's where you've got to be worth following. And that's where values come into the work in the not-for-profit sector. So attention, trust, and then support. And good luck if you think you can get support without trust. The fourth one is about considering partnerships, mergers, alliances. So when I'm working with what I think are the really effective, savvy, not-for-profit organisations, they've actually worked out ways of turning their competitors and rivals into partners. They don't lose their own sense of who they are. They don't depart from their own values and reason for being, but they're very strategic about working out who else can join them. And particularly around that attention, trust and support angle, those 3 steps, they're very conscious that maybe if they join up some efforts around some aspects of their work, and that sometimes they can actually grow and advance the work that they're doing. This is tipping up the other way, the traditional way of thinking about it. Normally, we don't spend time with our competitors or rivals. This is turning those relationships around, because we realise that it makes us stronger when we work with people rather than against them, particularly when resources are so stretched and harder to come by. And I don't just mean money, I also mean really talented people. I mean good ideas. I mean other ways of thinking. So partnerships, alliances, perhaps turning previous, competitors or rivals into partners is what I'm seeing some really smart not-for-profit organisations considering, and with really good results. The next point there is that I guess not-for-profit for me doesn't mean not commercial. I think that there's almost a sort of shame that we call it the not-for-profit sector. There are lots of other terms that people are starting to use, and maybe they're more appropriate, but they actually give the impression that running on the smell of the oily rag is okay, that we actually don't go for profit, that we're not that interested in the money. In fact, anybody working in this sector knows that the opposite is probably true. My point is that the organisations that I think are probably doing quite well are those that understand the real costs of delivering services or programs. They understand the user's perspective, they understand data, they dig into the numbers, they really understand what the real costs are, and they actually understand where the next money is coming from. This is really interesting to me because in the not-for-profit sector, the money will one day run out. In other words, those organisations that understand strategy, if I go back to the first point, foresight and reinvention, also understand that you really need to know when that money that you've got now is going to run out and where the next money is coming from. And I think the organisations that concentrate, at least to a degree, on the financial realities of this sector really have got a grip of what I think brings lots of organisations undone, and that is that they run on goodwill and hard work and really strong efforts by dedicated people. But then the resources run out, and they're often too small or ineffectual to exert much influence or power or find themselves in a position where they can actually swing a debate. And the sixth point is about culture. For me, governance in the not-for-profit sector doesn't just include regulation and rules and legislation. Yes, it does include all of that, but it also includes culture. In other words, how organisations in the sector put all of those skills and that knowledge together, how they join up the wisdom of their members, their committee members, their board members, their stakeholders, how they actually bring together all the different views that will give them the sharpest insight about the work that they need to do for the future. In fact, a lot of it's very interesting, a lot of the facilitation that I do is with organisations who are bringing together their stakeholder groups. Now, not just in the traditional sense, which is that you generally bring in those who know you well, already have a relationship with you, likely to be familiar with who you are and what you do, but I'm interested in inviting into that conversation people and organisations and perhaps agencies who are the contrarians, don't see things the same way, who maybe are the competitors and rivals. And I think in those conversations you get fabulously interesting insights about possibilities, about new ideas, and frankly about what your competitors might be saying about the environment. In other words, what it's like outside of your bubble, what it's like outside of your organisation and away from your committees, your processes, to look up and out and beyond. And the fabulous insight that organisations get when they consider doing this is that they always get insight into what might get in the way of implementing this strategy. In other words, what are the blockages? Where are the obstacles? Where are the naysayers? Where are the people who will work quite hard to bring you undone? And this is about understanding that a lot of what we do works in a political environment rather than a perfect heaven, and that's why culture, and I mean that every level. I mean around management committees and boards, I mean staff in an organisation, I mean volunteers, and I mean in the relationships that you have with stakeholders, without whom you simply can't do your best work. Well, there are lots of examples of organisations that continue, I think, probably to run at least some of those 6 elements across their thinking and across the work that they do. It would be useful perhaps for you too to think about whether your organisation or those that you know get into those 6 elements. In other words, strategy, motives and skills for board members, attention, trust and support, partnering, commercial side of the not-for-profit organisations, and the culture. A couple of examples that come to mind, and I won't go into the details of how they've gone about this because I think each one of them is an interesting case study, probably worth a session just on their own. I think of Country Women's Association, set up in 1922, so it's been around for a couple of generations, but it'll partner with the CSIRO. It'll get involved in art shows. It's got a very interesting way of continuing to refresh its original concept and reason for being, but without being trapped by the past. If I think about the Red Cross, set up in 1914, provides blood to, I think it's about 1 in 3 Australians. But you can't really work on health policy these days without thinking about what the Red Cross might say. So it has influence and power beyond its original intention. I can think of lots of other organisations like, or even the CSIRO that started out as a science research institution and has crossed over into cookbooks. It's very interesting to think about how you can take your core knowledge and stretch and expand and reshape its influence beyond the original constituency group. There's also something there about attracting additional resources perhaps and growing the strength of your organisation through attachments beyond the original group that you were first interested in. I think about, and these aren't all necessarily not-for-profit organisations or in fact in the community sector, and this is really one of my points, that we can learn from sectors and organisations and institutions well beyond the not-for-profit sector. And I'm a great believer in looking at case studies or really good practice or fabulous smart ideas or different ways of thinking about models from elsewhere. It's not like you have to invent these things from scratch. There are lots of organisations who have gone ahead of us. I think it's worth, for example, looking at the RACV here in Victoria, and I know that in other parts of Australia there are equivalent organisations, but RACV was set up as a social club for services to the motorist about 1905, I think, long time ago. Now it is a highly profitable organisation that runs services for everybody. It's involved in everything from the hospitality industry all the way through to providing policy influence and advice about transport matters and how we get around. And that's interesting to me because it is some way from the original intentions of the first few people who sat down and thought about what a Royal Automobile Club could actually do for its members. What it's done is stay attached to its original charter, but it has moved into a position of influence and power way beyond its original intention. But it hasn't abandoned what it started out to do. If your car breaks down, you can still get a Royal Automobile Club to take you off the road. But if you're in government, thinking about policy to do with transport or road use or traffic or blood alcohol, there's a whole lot of different rules and laws without which it would be very hard to take into the next steps without checking in with groups like the RACV. And when that happens, you really know that you have influence and power, and they can't do their best work without you. I don't need to keep going through the list, but there's Headspace, Beyond Blue. Actually, Beyond Blue's found an idea that's found its time. And the good people who work at Beyond Blue are really bringing to the forefront some issues and ways of thinking that continue to give us confidence and hope in a way that maybe a few years ago we weren't brave enough to think about. These are, and there's a whole list of them, and I hope that you can think of some too, they're high-impact organisations. They're advocates who actually get heard, but better than that, they actually get things done. They're not necessarily friends of the status quo. They have real power and influence, and their impact is big enough to swing debates. People return their phone calls. They get heard. They have adapted their original business models. They're actually quite entrepreneurial. And they promulgate really good practice. And then I think this is really interesting. It's a very distinctive feature about what leaders in this sector, I think, need to know and be able to do. They actually measure their effectiveness. They understand the difference between poor performance and strong performance. They are actually on a path, a constant path to improvement. And they continue to refresh and attract interesting ideas and people to the work that they do. In other words, they don't sit still. They keep growing and learning. I think the opposite of what I'm talking about is apparent to me from time to time too, and that is some early warning signs in some not-for-profit organisations that just bother me when I see it. And I do a lot of work in opportunities where boards and individuals and staff have actually seen some of these early warning signs and really want to do something about it. So the first is that I think some organisations are just too small, just too under-resourced to be effective. They've got great ideas, and their reason for being is earnest and proper and right, but they just can't get beyond being a small niche organisation. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly if they can continue to attract resources. But in terms of the early warning signs, that can be a weakness. The next is weak or poor leadership, particularly on culture, where boards are ineffective, they have poor planning processes, they can be quite dysfunctional. Poor behaviours get in the way of getting the best work done. It's almost as if they're inherently unstable. Two examples. When I see board members or committee members who are using the board or the committee as a private plaything, I'm bothered about that. I really want people to come to boards and committees and positions of influence in organisations like yours for the higher purpose, not for themselves, or to act out some piece of their own life theatre. And the other is that I think some people come to this sector because of pity. I'm bothered about that too. I say to people, I want you to have ambition for people, not pity. If you come to this work with ambition ahead of pity, something really quite magical can take place. The next is that often inside the organisation there are a few shared goals despite what people say in their rhetoric. Their work is often piecemeal, it's ad hoc. There's often quite a bit of conflict. Low energy when people are stressed, there's a whole lot of differences that people don't know how to resolve, they get bogged down and they can waste opportunities. There is such a thing as an unhealthy not-for-profit organisation. But always I'm convinced that the sort of work that you can do can make the organisations healthy. And because of what I said right at the start, because you really matter, then we rely on really healthy not-for-profit organisations that get the best of their work done consistently and under pressure and during really challenging times. The next is that I worry about board members or committee members that lack self-knowledge. In other words, or maybe they don't lack self-knowledge, but they don't, for example, have the necessary governance skills, and they won't seek support or get assistance, or they won't change their particular positional view of the world despite evidence to the contrary. They can't always spot early warning signs. They're sometimes, I've seen this, disdainful of professional development or think that it's somebody else's responsibility to organise training. Or they think they already know it all. And I guess what bothers me about that is that the most efficient, and I have to say this is true in every single sector, and in the companies and that are household names that I work for, or government departments that run major policy development, to take responsibility for your own training and learning and understanding that there are fringe benefits to failure. So if there are case studies or examples of where things haven't worked out, that these are great opportunities for learning rather than running away from issues that may not have worked out the way you'd hoped. The next is I get bothered when I see organisations that operate in a bubble. They're isolated, they're insular, they shut out any contrarians or views that don't support their own, and I think that's an early warning sign of becoming isolated and fragile. And the other early warning sign is that one day the money's going to run out and people don't know where to go to after that. So I think there are a couple of last comments that I'd make about, I guess, what I see the really consistently efficient, successful and sustainable not-for-profits that I've worked with at least doing quite regularly. One, they use foresight to spot opportunities. In other words, they are on an idea that's found its time and they've been able to see the future on behalf of all of us and work towards making that happen. Number two, they keep evolving as organisations, they keep moving. What they know and are able to do is how to keep looking at their performance, how to be more effective, how to get past blockages to change. I think this is really important. It's one thing having a strategic plan, getting ready for strategy, getting all the words right on a page, and then you go back 2 or 3 years later and very little has actually shifted. So that's where simply knowing isn't enough. You have to be able to do things as well. In other words, you have to be able to keep moving, go to action. This is where leadership is a verb. The third is that they make their own luck. In other words, they don't wait for an opportunity to come towards them. They take the steps. They take responsibility for making the moves, for looking for opportunities, for being alert and able to jump on the next opportunity that comes along. That's a mindset. It's actually something to do with their worldview that the best is still yet to come. The fourth is leadership, and that involves technical and people, skills and culture. It's about the power of the group to join up their best thinking and to give us confidence and hope that throughout the work of this sector, the lives of people can be improved. The fifth one is they understand allocation of resources, and that's both dollars, but it's also people and time and the work of others who can be partners. So resources not just in the narrowest sense of dollars, but also talent. The next is they step outside the bubble. They look up and out and beyond their organisation for ideas, for ways of influencing, for shaping power, for strategic networking. And the seventh is that they really develop effective partnerships. Very few of those organisations that I think are the really efficient, and successful and sustainable organisations do it on their own. They completely understand that this is about work that is with others, and joining up strategically those partnerships has been really, really important. I suppose there's one other one, the last one that I'd probably mention, and that is that they manage change really well. There's all that rhetoric, all that language about change management. So these are organisations that are thoughtful in anticipating that when they change, they're affecting the lives of other people who might need to change as well. This is part of the heart of the matter of leadership, that it is also to do with taking something away from people and replacing it with something new. So what they're taking away is the pattern and predictability of the past and replacing it with the new. And they get that, and they understand that. And they really work hard on designing thoughtful ways to bring about change. So there are my thoughts on what leaders in the not-for-profit sector need to do to be successful. Not just successful, but also sustainable over a long period of time in a sector that's experiencing lots of change and lots of challenges, and at the same time is probably the most vibrant and dynamic place for all of us to feel the benefits of what happens when you put good people to work. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, for this wonderful presentation. We do have a question here from Alexandra. How about resistance to change in the not-for-profit sector and those who actively work against refreshing and improvement?
Look, I think that's, and it's almost probably worth another session, because I think this is an area that's really being overlooked to the detriment of lots and lots of organisations. It's almost as if we just assume that when we talk about change and when we start changing the way we go about doing things, we're going to be able to do that pretty smoothly or safely, or in fact that lots of other people want us to change. And what I find a lot of, and this is probably much more normal, is that there are lots of forces that can work against us, particularly if we don't plan and design change really well. Often what happens is that an organisation will develop a strategic plan and then they set about implementing it. What they miss is the step that says, okay, what's going to get in our way? Who's going to get in our way? Why? Why now? And let's think about this very carefully. What should we actually do about that? So let's anticipate where we're going to be brought undone, where the contrarians or our enemies or our competitors or rivals are going to come at us, and actually have a plan to do that. Not wait and just see whether or not it happens, but actually work quite hard. There are lots and lots of reasons for why people and processes and systems get in our way from doing the best that we possibly can. Sometimes they're really simple, sometimes it's to do with, so you're in an organisation and you and I are competing for the same amount of money and money's tight and my submission probably, I hope, will be better than yours. That's a really simple one, and that goes on every day. I understand the competitive forces in the sector. In fact, it sometimes amuses me that this is the sector where people say, oh, this is all about, you know, we care for each other, we're full of hearts and minds, and we really want people to do well. And I can't tell you the number of organisations I find that would eat each other's lunch if they had half an opportunity. So I completely understand the competitive forces in the sector. But there is also something about understanding that when you bring about change, it isn't just technical. This is where leadership really matters. It's often in this sector to do with persuasion, with negotiation, with trade-offs, with asking. This is leadership without formal authority. This is about using attention, trust and support to work with people. So a really simple answer to a question that deserves probably a more thoughtful answer, but it is that in the planning you'll start seeing the early warning signs, or where the potential is for the barriers and the obstacles. The second is it is about anticipating that and probably doing some scenario planning and testing and some problem solving to make that happen. And probably the third is to test out ideas for change, not just with all of those friends and allies and supporters who always say yes to you, but those who might be interested in your failure. In other words, those who are not invested in your success. And when you have that conversation, you have an enormous amount of insight to help you deal with what's coming at you. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Chris. We have another question here. Would you be able to repeat the first point on the list of what successful not-for-profits need to do?
I think that's the one about foresight to spot opportunities.
Yes.
So it was about foresight. So this is about being really strategic. It's not just having a strategy. And in fact, I can't tell you the number of organisations I've seen that have gone under that had the most gorgeous strategic plan. But this is about not just getting the words right in documents. This is about a mindset. It's about an attitude. It's about really carefully thinking through what the future's looking like, because that's where you're headed. So the point that I made was foresight to spot opportunities. Thanks for the question.
Okay, Chris. Thank you. That was our last question, Chris. Do you want to add anything?
I simply want to say I really hope that you have lots of opportunities to think through and test and take some of those ideas and tip them upside down and have a look at them in your own context, that you perhaps open up conversations to grow and learn, that you look at mistakes and failures and errors and those organisations that have disappeared from the scene and find out why, to use them as real case studies. I'm very grateful to you today for the time that you've made to listen to the webinar. I'm really grateful for your attention. I'm really grateful to Connecting Up, and I really wish you well in the important work that you do. I think you probably got the impression from me quite rightly that I think this is an extraordinary sector with extraordinary opportunities, and I think we're at a difficult and interesting time and really thinking quite hard about what it takes to make our organisations successful and enduring and the most effective is a really, really important thing to be doing. If you go to the Leadership Victoria website, there are some blogs there that I've written. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I know that Connecting Up has got my contact details available to you. So I'm more than happy for you to think of this as an ongoing conversation, and I'd be delighted to hear from you. So thanks again for your contribution in being with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for the presenting, and thank you each and every one of you who could join us today. You will be receiving an email shortly with a link to the recording. So until next time, thank you once again. Bye-bye.
The organizer